guys, this is chapter 4, key issue 1, and this is our unit on culture. Chapter 4 deals with different types of culture and the differences between cultures, and then chapter 5 deals with languages, and chapter 6 deals with religion. Here's Teddy. He wants to say hi, and look how handsome he is in his little bandana. He's so cute. Okay, so for this little section, we are going to mostly talk about the differences between folk culture and popular culture. So, just if you think back to chapter 1 when we were talking about regions, we talked about how there's lots of different things that can make up a region, and one of those things was different cultural traits, right? A vernacular or perceptual region is what that is. So you just need to know that regions can be made up of cultures, and those things in turn can be mapped, right? So even though this is the continent of Africa, we're also saying that this is African culture. Our country is largely a Euro-Western culture, although I would argue we also have a lot of Latin American culture, right? And other cultures are mixed in there from other places. But since the majority of people in this country have ancestral roots in Europe, that makes sense. Islamic culture, you can see, is the Middle East and Northern Africa. So just keep that in mind, right? Like, just because like Latin America is just concentrated in this area, like these cultures can be intermixed, okay? Okay, so something we need to talk about are some just definitions, habits, what's a habit, what's a custom, and then we've talked about culture a few times, but I'm just going to reiterate a couple of things there. So, habit is a repetitive act performed by a particular individual, but when it becomes a lot of people doing that habit, that's more like a cultural habit, okay? And a custom is the frequent repetition of an act to the extent that it becomes a characteristic of the group of people performing the act, okay? So it's a habit for Americans to sing, is it God Bless America or America the Beautiful, in the 7th inning stretch during a football game, and that has kind of become part of our culture. It's the custom within our culture, okay? So that's the difference between those things. When we're combining customs and habits and all of those different things and putting them together, like the body of that really makes up what a culture is, right? And then we've also talked about in the past how culture is the things that we care about and the things that we take care of, right? Both of those things also encompass culture. But typically your customs are going to fit into one of those categories. Things you take care of or things you care about. Right, Teddy? He's busy. So, is culture something that we inherit, or is it something that we learn and adapt to? I would say that it's mostly things that we adapt to. It isn't something that is born within us, right? But we tend to have the culture of our parents, but it's because we live with our parents, not because that's like part of our genetic makeup, right? So, we also have these different things that make up culture, one of which is mentefacts, which is the central enduring elements of a culture. So it's like values and beliefs, language and religion, the stories that we pass down from generation to generation. Those are the mentefacts of our culture. And those are different than material traits, in that mentefacts are almost like, think of them as invisible things, right? Religion is largely just something that people believe in, although there are material traits of religions, like faith is something that is invisible largely, right? Your language is something that is heard, and although you can write it, it's kind of something intangible, okay? So think of it that way. Whereas material traits, material culture, are those things that we make and that we can touch and hold in our hands. So things like tools, pieces of art, houses, clothing, that sort of thing. Food would be, that's all part of material culture. And an artifact is any item made by humans that represents a material aspect of culture. Okay, so like, let's say that 2,000 years from now, people are looking for artifacts of our culture. You could think of like, perhaps our cell phones would be artifacts. I don't know what else is important to us as a culture right now. The TV shows that we watch could be artifacts, anything like that. Okay, so here it is, just broken down a little more for you. So mentefacts, right? Those are those kind of intangible, invisible things. Language, religion, ethnicity, your values, right? What you believe is morally right or wrong is even a mentefact of culture and your beliefs. Material culture is more like the things you can touch and see and feel. Buildings, tools, clothing, art, music, and food. Okay, a little bit of review. How does culture spread? Through diffusion, which we already should know, right? Relocation, hierarchical, and contagious diffusion. Those are all different ways that culture can spread. I could put stimulus diffusion on there as well, but these are the 3 most common types of diffusion. So if you do not know these definitions for each yet, you gotta get those down quickly. I told you almost everything from chapter 1 is going to come back at some point, so we need to make sure that we really have that terminology down solid, and this will not be the last time we talk about diffusion. So another little review, right? Distance decay says that the further away from the hearth, the origin of something, the less important it probably is, or the less connectivity there is between that and that thing, right? So an example would be people in Reno don't often go to football games because we don't have a local football team, like NFL football team, right? That's further away from us. We are less likely to go to that game. However, we also need to keep in mind time-space compression, right, or time-space conversions, which is because we have all of this because we have all this technology like the internet and phones and things like that, the connectivity has increased, especially on a global level, right? So distance doesn't mean as much as it used to because of space-time compression, okay? So this is important when we're talking about popular culture, because popular culture means exactly what it says, right? It's popular, it's globalized, it reaches lots of different people, it's not confined to a specific group of people. And part of the reason we have so many things that would be considered popular culture is because of time-space compression, right? Okay, so let's get into those differences. So we have folk versus popular culture. So folk culture is with small groups, and usually the traditions are spread orally from generation to generation. That's also called folklore. Usually they are in homogeneous groups, meaning people are the same, right? The same ethnicity, speak the same language, have the same religion, something like that. And it's more common, I should say, to find folk culture in rural rather than urban areas. And we usually don't really know what the hearth is. We don't really know who started a trend specifically in folk culture. And diffusion, really the big difference between folk culture and popular culture is folk culture does not diffuse or diffuses so slowly that it doesn't become popular, right? Like it's very specific to that group of people. These group of people do this. The rest of the world doesn't do that. And then popular culture is the opposite. We're talking about large groups of people that share in that culture, lots of common habits and customs. So this could be a more heterogeneous group of people, right? Different religions, different languages, different ethnicities, and would be more commonly found in urban rather than rural areas. The hearth is typically in MDC, right? Usually it's the US, or it could be Britain or France or one of the Western European nations. Those are usually the hearths for popular culture. So we know what the hearth is usually for popular culture, whereas we usually don't know for folk culture. And the big thing is that these things have diffused, right? They've reached lots of different people, which is why they call it popular culture. So that's different than folk culture. So it's really important that you get down the differences between these two things, because sometimes you'll get a test question that says, is this piece of culture folk or popular? So something we could talk about is folk versus popular music, right? So there's differences between the music in both situations. So folk music tends to tell a story or give some sort of history, right? It's very personal and usually informative. So if we think back to like folklore and those stories that are passed down from generation to generation, oftentimes that is through song. We usually don't know who wrote the folk songs, and they are passed down orally, right? They're performed and other people learn them. Popular music is created for profit, right? Taylor Swift makes a lot of money, and that's, even though I'm sure she also enjoys sharing her music with the world, I would assume, she also is in it to also get money, right? We have professional artists, and what's professional about it is they make money for what they do, right? Highly technical, right? Lots of different instruments can be involved, and usually created by an individual or some sort of record company or producer, and they own that, like the rights to that music, right? Whereas in folk music, there's no ownership, right? It's kind of shared throughout the culture. Okay, and then folk versus popular art. Folk art, usually there isn't really an artist per se. It's usually some sort of craft person, and usually it's not made as art, but serves some sort of function. So if you look at artifacts from ancient Egypt, oftentimes they made a lot of pottery and sketched a lot of different like stories onto the pottery. So like that served a purpose, like they could use that art so it wasn't purely decorative. Whereas popular art is usually made by professional artists, and it's a commodity, meaning you can sell it and people will buy it. And sometimes, like, some of it can be really, really expensive, right? A Van Gogh piece is going to be worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, whereas folk culture, that doesn't really happen because that wasn't the point behind that piece, right? And then we have folk versus popular sports. My dogs are fighting right here. Well, they're like play fighting. They're not really fighting, but they're loud. So folk sports are games that can be pretty specific to a group of people, right? There are popular sports like baseball and bowling and golf and lots of different. Soccer is the most popular sport in the world. So those would be popular sports, but folk sports are more like just in this little town in Britain, this group plays this sport. And I actually have an example for you that I'm going to show you here. This is called shove-tight football, and this is an example of folk sports, and this is from 2003. So this is how it happens. This is in Britain, and so they throw out this ball to this crowd of people. Somebody catches it, and then it gets nuts. And then, so he tries to throw it back to the team, and the teams are, I think, divided up by neighborhood, so it shows you just kind of how small this sport is. And then basically it just turns into like a giant, like soccer sort of, rugby sort of game where people, it's just like there's no like rhyme or reason or rules to it. It's just about like who can get the ball, and it's just this huge mob of people, and you can see like it gets like it runs into different like streets and neighborhoods. It's like a lot of rough housing. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Ooh, that's a good one. And it's just people trying to get the ball. That's what they're trying to do. And I think they're supposed to get the ball to a certain location, but I'm not totally sure what that is. But see, it's like a lot of pushing and shoving. So this is shove-tied football. Pretty crazy stuff. And you won't find that in the U.S., right? This is very much a folk sport. So, all right. So that is it for today, I believe. Yes. Okay. So I will meet you back here for chapter 4, Kyushu 2, which I think I'm going to film in just a couple of minutes. So I will literally see you right back here. So happy homework. Be ready for a pop quiz as usual.